Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Katie McInerney, and I'm an assistant sports editor here at the Boston Globe. And I'm excited to have our baseball team here to preview the Red Sox season, which, in case you missed it, does not start tomorrow. It starts on Friday. They're rained out, but they'll be in New York on Friday to open the season at the Yankees. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists tonight. We have Peter Abraham, Julian McWilliams, Alex Spear, and columnist Chad Finn. You guys can go ahead and turn your cameras on. Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing?
Hi, Katie.
Hey.
So I know that we're all pretty excited to get started. And I know that based on all the questions that we received ahead of time and the ones that are already coming into the chat, there's a lot to talk about. So let's just dive right into it. The first question I have for you guys, it is about a player who we're not actually going to see for a little bit. It's about Chris Sale. A lot of readers wanted to know what his future is. I guess the biggest question here is this injury one that indicates that perhaps there's, he's never going to be able to pitch effectively again because he's struggled with injuries for so long? Is there a way that he can come back from this? Can he change his approach to be able to be more durable? And also, what can we expect to see from him this year once he is healthy enough? So Alex, I wanted to start with you because you're able to talk with him one-on-one and got some insight into how he's been feeling in his approach so far. What did you learn? And can you take on that question of, will he ever be able to pitch effectively? Will we see him back this year in June, like we're expecting?
I do think that we'll see him back in June. This is an injury, the stress fracture of the rib, that is sometimes characterized as by teams as an intercostal strain or an oblique strain, or what basically happens is the muscle pulled so hard on the rib cage that it created a slight fissure in it, but not a displaced one. And it happens. It is not a frequent injury, but it is an injury with precedent. As a one-off, and Sale has never had oblique issues before, never had intercostal problems before. As a one-off, the rib should heal. It's a broken rib, it should heal, bones heal. So it's not alarming in its own right. It is more alarming when you take it in the totality of the Chris Sale medical record of the last few years, which include a game of operation. Bzz, 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 right? We haven't hit the nose yet, but we've gotten shoulder, we've gotten neck, we've gotten back, we've gotten oblique, we've gotten elbow, obviously. So that's a bit concerning for a guy who has a delivery that's pretty violent, particularly given that, as he puts it, well, there's no injury to the muscle because you'd have to have muscle there in order for there to be an injury to the muscle. So I think that the best way to characterize him is he is as one of the great competitors in the game, extremely frustrated at the fact that he does not have the ability to compete. He's aware of the fact that that his absence is always going to be tied up into the contract that he signed, and he's no Major League Baseball player is going to give back the tens of millions of dollars that a team decided to invest in them, but he recognizes that he's not delivering what the Red Sox expected of him when he did sign. I think that there's still a very good pitcher in there, and he felt great throwing the baseball while he was building up to the season. He felt like his arm strength was better than it had been probably since 2017. But the fact of the matter is, while he was throwing with that kind of violence, he suffered an injury. So I think that you're going to see periods of excellence for Chris Sale over the remaining, I guess by the time he returns in, let's say, June. I think that's a reasonable prognosis. The Red Sox thought that there was a chance that he would be back, as the earliest he would be back was like 5 days earlier than the 60-day DL, which is why that was the right roster move for them. I think that you would hope the best case scenario for them is kind of Clayton Kershaw with the Dodgers, where you get a guy who's not available for 162 games of the year or for 33 starts of the year. You hope for 20 to 25 brilliant starts in someone who's ready to post in October.
And this is the kind of thing that the Red Sox couldn't have predicted, so this question is a little unfair, but do you think there's any regret in that contract, in that trade? Chad, you're always good for a hot take. Do you feel differently about it knowing that Chris Sale is once again injured?
Yeah, no, not really, Katie, because it was the right thing to do at the time. And if Dan were here, he might be more willing to revise history on that than I am and say it was a dumb thing to do from the beginning. But there's always risk with pitchers, especially pitchers who are turning that corner to the wrong side of 30. When the steal is up, if his last year doesn't vest, he'll be at 35 when it's over, could be 36. So a lot of risk they knew at the time when they signed him. I don't think they expected the stack of injuries that he's had and the significant ones of Tommy John that cost him a huge amount of time, and then now these fluky, frustrating ones that you really can't foretell that are setting him back from showing us what kind of pitcher he is at this point. I mean, that's the thing we really don't know. We just got a glimpse of him. What was it, 9 starts last year after he came back from Tommy John, and he threw hard. He looked like Chris Sale at times, but his command really wasn't there. And the big question was, what was he going to be at that point? If he could be durable, what kind of pitcher were you going to get? And we haven't even got a sense of any durability yet. There's just been these setbacks. So when Chris Sale is healthy, we're still not really sure what he's going to be. I think you should feel good about it because he's a extremely talented pitcher. He's a smart guy. Who probably can adjust to having diminished stuff if that's the case, but we just don't know at this point. So there's more than one question mark with Chris Sale right now, and it's too bad because you can tell as when Alex and Pete and Julian write about him, it's really frustrating for him, much more so than it is even for fans of the team.
I would like to jump back to the question of his re-signing, though, because that was actually a splintering moment for the Red Sox organization and one that probably greased the skids for Dave Dombrowski to be fired. I go into some level of detail in that in the paperback edition of Homegrown, but if there was a lot of that was not a 100% consensus, and I think that that was viewed as a transaction that was driven largely by Dave Dombrowski to the point that that what looked like it was going to be an extension for Dave Dombrowski ended up being kind of setting things on a bit more of a road of his departure.
Was Evaldi part of that too? Because Evaldi looked like a bad deal for a while.
Yeah, to some degree. I think that there was a question related to pitcher risk. Dombrowski's vision of the future was that as the Red Sox perhaps were going to turn over their positional core, that the way to create stability and his vision of sustainable success was kind of an elite top line rotation, and to just spend a ton of money there. So he envisioned, so he doubled down on Evaldi and on Sale, and he still had Price, and he envisioned him as being part of that as well. And there were others in the organization at the time who thought that that might not be the best allocation of resources. But Dave Dombrowski was the ultimate decision maker and as the president of baseball operations. So you had people who would express disagreement with him internally, but who kind of were deferential to his ultimate decision making authority, but nonetheless it started to create some fissures.
What's funny about the whole thing is that when the Red Sox didn't sign John Lester, they said at the time they were being cautious about pitchers who were going to be over 30. Then John Lester went out and basically repeated his career performance with the Cubs, what he had done with the Red Sox. So then John Henry says, well, we blew it last time with Lester. Now we're going to change what we're doing. And now the sale decision backfires on them too. So, and I guess they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't. But for different reasons, neither of those decisions worked out well for them.
Yeah, the Price one backfired as well. They got Evaldi right though. That one's worked out well.
All right, that's a perfect segue. So I want to talk about Evaldi next. Pete, you just wrote that big feature that was in the Sunday paper about how I think the way that it was built to me was, Evaldi turned out to be a pitcher that Sale hasn't been for the Red Sox. 3 consecutive opening day starts he's set up for. What did you learn about him this spring and his approach? And I know that one of the things that we often talk about is that a lot of Red Sox fans remember Evaldi for his performance in the 2018 World Series when he lost that game. So it's a memory that weighs heavily on him. But I guess, what have you learned and what you've seen from him last year and this year? And what can we expect from Evaldi this season?
Well, I think what I learned about Evaldi is when you think about him as a player, a lot of people think about, well, this is a guy who can throw 99 to 100. He's got this enormous fastball. That's kind of been his calling card from early in his career. Every team that's traded for him has talked about this tremendous fastball. But now he's become this pitcher who, while he still throws hard, has found a lot of other different ways to get people out. He has 5 pitches. He occasionally will quick pitch. He'll occasionally have a hesitation in his delivery. He talked about, having watched some of Louis Tiant's highlights and how the deception and the hesitation can make you a better pitcher. And you would never think a guy with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball would be trying to trick a hitter, but those are some of the things he's done to throw off a hitter's timing. So I was impressed by how he's evolved as a pitcher and that he thinks about these things and how he's looked at the analytics and how to correctly use his assortment of pitches. He's not just a guy who says, well, okay, I'm in trouble, I'm going to throw it as hard as I can, which might have been what he was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I find him to be an interesting guy because he's coming up on it. He's in his contract year, and the Red Sox will have some decisions to make. He really likes it in Boston. His family bought a home for during the season. He liked to put down roots with one team. And when you think about what he's done, he's been their savior for the last couple of years as Sale has struggled with staying on the field.
What do you guys think? Do you think Evaldi? Well, how old is Evaldi again? 32? Am I making that up?
Yeah, 32.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that he's a player that the Red Sox should have stick around?
I think so. I think he's proven that. I mean, over the course of the couple of years, last 3 years, he's figured out how to take care of his body. As Pete alluded to, I think he's figured out like a routine. And the main thing with Evaldi has always been health, right? He's never been able to stay healthy. So now that he's been able to do that, and I think a lot of guys mature like as they get older in terms of like what to do with their body. They understand their body a little bit differently. They understand how to get hitters out a little bit more. They get more of a feel for who's in the league, how to attack that hitter. And I think you look at Evaldi, you're like you see the total like how he's evolved as a pitcher in terms of just his maturation in terms of just how to attack guys and how to take care of his body. So I definitely think if you're looking at that contract now, when Dave Dombrowski had him sign it, they were like, what is he doing? He's just he's just championship drunk, right? He's World Series drunk. Like, why is he just handing out that contract? But the way he's pitched now, he's proven that he's sort of he's kind of on the cheap end for them.
When we look at the rest of the rotation, it falls with do we know if Rich Hill and Michael Wacha are going to go 3 and 4, or I should say 2 and 3? Can you guys run through the rotation? I guess my question should be, we get past those two guys. I know they don't have Sale until at least June. Once you get past Evaldi, what do they have? Do they have enough? Can guys like Rich Hill hold up and contribute in a more substantial way, in a way that's substantial enough for this team, especially when we're going to get to the relief pitching next? How will the rest of it unfold? Alex, I know that you spoke with Rich Hill in the offseason fairly frequently about his regime and how he's trying to stay healthy. Do you want to start there?
Sure. Well, I mean, Rich is he's had a fairly bizarre career. When you think of a guy who was an extremely promising starter in his mid-20s back in the mid-2000s, ended up being moved to the bullpen by the 2010s, spent years there, then became a starter again in his mid-30s, and just as a 41-year-old, in his 3rd straight season as the oldest starting pitcher in Major League Baseball, had the 2nd highest innings total of his career. That's weird, and certainly something that he feels like he's found a routine that allowed him, that contributed to his health over the course of 2021, when he threw about 160 innings, just under. And I think that he feels like he is someone who knows what he needs to do in order to be available every 5 days. At this point, whether or not that proves true, there aren't a lot of 42-year-olds now who are able to do that. But so I think, again, you're looking at the Red Sox having spent the offseason adding depth, adding guys, understanding that the likelihood is that they're not going to make it through the season with 5 guys. This is already proven true with Sale. So they're going to need to have at least 6 guys in order to make it through the season. But then they add on a Paxton who they're hoping to get by the summer. I think that they're hoping that they don't know how the parts will interlock. They're hoping that they're able to get somewhere along the way. They have 7 proven major league caliber starting pitchers in the form of the season opening rotation of Evaldi, Pavetta, Houck, Hill, and Waka, as well as Sale and Paxton in reserve. Maybe Whitlock somewhere along the way. Later in the season, I think that they're hoping they have a couple of prospects who have pretty electric arms in Brian Bayo and Brian Mata, who maybe will be available late in the season. Another one who could be kind of serviceable at the back end of a rotation named Josh Winkowski. So they hope that they have the fit for 162 games. Of those, there's a lot of risk involved, as there often is with pitchers, but it's going to be interesting. And I think that frames a lot. The Red Sox project as kind of a mid-80s win team right now, slightly ahead of where they were last year. Most teams project in that range in the AL East. I think that when you figure out how far they'll diverge from it one way or the other, there's probably a lot of it's going to be determined, as Julian wrote I think today. A lot of it's going to be determined by the pitching staff.
Julian, Pete, you guys spent a while down at spring training. Of those starters or potential starters, was there anybody who stood out to you or anything that you noticed that was different from last year for some of these guys? I'm particularly interested in Houck and how he's going to adjust to being in this role for the whole season.
I've always personally looked at Houck as a guy who's I think is going to end up in the bullpen because he relies pretty heavily on two pitches. But they are going to give him a chance. He has earned the chance. So it'll be interesting to see if he runs with that. The guy I kind of took notice of in spring training was Garrett Whitlock because of his confidence. Last year he was sort of the very humble rookie and doing anything that he could to make the team, and whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And he really had a terrific season. Now, not that he's coming in expecting anything, and he's, as Alex mentioned, he's not going to start the season in the rotation. But to me, he's a guy who knows how good what his capabilities are. He's got big league hitters out in big spots, including the postseason. He strikes me like somebody who could handle a heavier load. And if it does get to a point where he's in the rotation, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him run with that, because he strikes me now as somebody who it's gone beyond, let's just see if I can do this. And now I know I can do this, and I want to see how far I can go with it.
Yeah, I think Houck is a sort of an interesting case, right? I think you're looking at a guy with like huge upside. I think he's like, if you look at the pitches that he has, the movement that he has, and I think in some ways it's like the guy that's like I don't think he realizes how like really sometimes how good his stuff is and how tough of that, or maybe he does. But I think, his stuff just naturally moves because of his arm slot and his body movements. And, some guys just have that natural movement. I think Cora alluded to it during spring training. Like, regardless of what the numbers say, like you could look at the opponent and just see like he's a tough at bat. He's a type of pitcher that he's not fun for people to face. So, given that Chris Sale is out for as long as he is, I think it puts a lot of pressure, or not pressure, maybe like it puts a lot more pressure on him to perform the way the Red Sox want him to perform, because they've sort of been waiting on him for a long time, and he's sort of been that guy that's been in between. He's a bullpen guy. Is he a starter, bullpen starter? Well, now they need him in the starting rotation, because though their bullpen is sort of limited right now, I think they do need starters. If you look at someone like Garrett Whitlock, and part of the reason why they have him in the bullpen is because, they need his arm there. Well, what does that do? That frees up a spot in the rotation for somebody like Houck to come in and, and perform, and possibly perform the way he does. So I think you're looking at a person that could possibly contribute to the Red Sox in the 2022 season in a positive way. Because when he's on, like he's a really dominant pitcher.
Yeah, the guy who's interesting to me is one who's probably being talked about the least, and that's Nick Pavetta, because he's a little bit older than I think fans realize. He's 29. He's not a young kid that they stole away from the Phillies. He may be somebody they stole away from the Phillies, but he's not entering his prime. He's in it, and maybe even a little bit beyond it. So they need him to continue to build on what he did last year. I mean, he had his games. He had a game 4th of July against Oakland where he was just electrifying. He was fearless down the stretch and in the postseason, but he's also a guy who his ERA was over 4.5, tends to get wild sometimes. And you look at him and you're not sure what you're going to get out of him this season. It came and went with the Phillies. So he had his real ups and downs there before they finally gave up on him. And the Red Sox really seemed to salvage something valuable last year, but we've got to see that out of him from a second season now, and a little bit more reliability from him seems pretty important to me, because he's in that number 2 slot right now, more or less, and you're counting on him to be a steady, dependable pitcher when he's been a very good one at times, and other times he's been somebody you're wondering if he can hold down the job. So to me, that's a pretty pivotal guy in that rotation.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, Chad. Like Pavetta is like the toughest guy for me to write about, right? Like, because if you look at him on like really certain days, it's like, wow, this guy has figured something out.
Yeah.
And then he has those games where it's just like, whoa, like he just like stinks up the place. So I think that's, and then you look at the ERA and you're just like, oh, he was solid for the Red Sox last year. And you're like, oh, 4.53 ERA. And it's like, well, how can I, possibly show fans that how important he was to the team? And so I think that's the kind of a guy that you have to watch. But again, if you're coming with a 4.5, 4.5 ERA into a season where you don't really have any starting pitching, then how reliable are you? Sure, you might be reliable to a rotation with, I guess, Sale, Evaldi, and a couple of other good, good starters in there. Even like say if, their 2018 team, if he was like a number 5 or something like that, okay, you can throw him in there. But when you're talking about a guy that they don't have Sale, they don't have a prime like David Price, they don't have like Nate Evaldi, playoff Nate Evaldi in there, and you throw a guy in the number 2 spot who has a 4.5 ERA. Well, that can become inflated and become a little bit of a problem. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he pitches and how he's grown into this season, because I think last year was his first year where the Red Sox really said, hey, we're trusting you to be a starter. And I think the years before that, he didn't really have that. So now he's in his second year of the team trusting him to be a starter. So we'll see how he like sort of, capitalizes on that and sort of builds off last season.
So I want to be mindful of time, because we could literally talk about starting pitching for an hour. But I want to talk about relievers a little bit. We did get a question submitted from Brad, who wants to know if you could see the bullpen not being a nightly crapshoot for Cora for the first month as he steps up. But in all sincerity, beyond Whitlock coming out of the bullpen, I wonder if you guys could offer some insight, particularly in some of the relievers that they acquired in the offseason, what we saw in spring training from guys like Diekman, and also who's going to be the closer for the start? How are they going to approach bullpen management while they figure this out? Because with such a tenuous grip on this rotation, if they have one more injury, they're going to have a problem. And then I don't know that. I'm curious if you guys think the bullpen can step up when it needs to. So I don't know who wants to take that one and start to talk about some of those relievers they acquired.
Well, they've only got 10 relievers to start the season. They ought to be able to find a few who could be helpful, I would think. I would like to think so. So, Matt Barnes obviously needs to sort of, retake that job, or at least retake the idea of being a reliable guy in the late innings. Ryan Brazier did not have a particularly promising camp, but spring training doesn't necessarily mean a lot for a veteran guy. They have some younger guys that, have good stuff, and you can see them stepping into roles. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Whitlock. But I think for a lot of teams, you're going to see some interesting combinations, because with the short spring training and the expanded rosters, I thought it was a lot that the Red Sox were taking 15 pitchers with them to opening day. I saw the Twins are taking 16. There's a number of teams that are taking, 16 pitchers, and they'll have 11 relievers. So I don't think in April you're going to have a very good sense of what the bullpen is going to look like in July. I think in April it's going to be a lot of, who's available that night, and let's figure out what we can do for now.
If the question is how did the relievers look in spring training, how did this reliever look in spring training? The answer is almost universally bad. It was bad. That's partly by virtue of the compressed build. This was a very weird build up to the season. Cora talked about the fact that was true across a number of managers, a number of teams were talking about how their relievers did not look good. They only had a few outings in order to get ready. They didn't have a great, most of them are not in regular season, are not showing regular season caliber stuff that you usually see in the latter part of spring training. Like Ryan Brazier and Matt Barnes are both showing velocity that is well below what is their norms. And There were a lot of discussions about pitchers whose mechanics, relievers whose mechanics are still off. They just didn't have the repetitions at kind of high speed, the pseudo adrenaline, even with the pseudo adrenaline of spring, to get locked in. So I think that, one of the strengths of Cora is that I think that he's very good at matching the stuff that he sees in relievers to the appropriate role for them. The key is finding someone, a few guys who have the stuff to be able to use them in high leverage situations reliably at any given moment in time. But the way that he employed the bullpen last year, in the last month of last year, it was a Franken bullpen. Like, it was just like he would just mash different parts of it and kind of create this like weird form changing, shape shifting structure over the course of the last month of the season. I think we're probably going to see a fair amount of that over the beginning of the season. Could be wrong, but I do not think that there's going to be a single guy anchoring the ninth inning. I think that there's going to be a lot of matchup based decisions over the course of the first month of the season. The only one whose stuff truly impressed over the course of spring training, and Pete and Julian saw more of them, so they could correct me if I'm wrong, but Cutter Crawford is a rookie who was throwing hard. He was the one guy who was throwing 97 reliably when he was coming out of the bullpen in spring training. He has a kind of interesting pitch mix, like nothing that's like no wipeout, like secondary stuff that's electric swinginess, but enough. He has a little splitter that he can use against lefties. He throws a cutter, which is cool because his name is Cutter, and he throws a breaking ball. So he's someone who you're always interested to see how rookies respond when the lights flip on. Because sometimes out of the bullpen happens in unexpected ways, and you hope for that upside play, and then they hope that guys like him buy time for the rest of them to find their form.
I think let's shift on now that it's at 6:30. Let's shift on to the infield, because I do want to get to that and answer some of these questions as well. So let's start with this. A lot of questions about Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers. To set the scene for the listeners here, Devers is eligible for free agency after 2023, and Bogaerts is eligible to opt out at the end of this year of his 6-year deal that he signed 3 years ago, very team-friendly contract. There were a lot of questions, and I'm curious for what all of you guys think on this one. So we can go around, or we can bounce off of each other. Can the Red Sox afford to keep both of them? Do you think that they should? Do you think that they want to? And then if they can't, which one would you guys believe should be the priority for the Red Sox to hold on to? Anyone want to jump into that one first?
I think I was having this conversation the other day. I think, obviously Bogaerts is somebody that you would want to keep around, but I think he's a Boris guy, right? And I think that if he's a person that took an unlikely, which isn't, which Boris doesn't usually do with his clients, and it really doesn't, you don't really see it with Boris clients. He took that, team-friendly deal, the 6 years, $120 million, and you look up now and it's like, okay, you see Seager get his money, you see Marcus Semien get their money, you see Carlos Correa get his money on an average annual value, and now he's going to go to Minnesota where he has over 1,000 OPS, and he's going to light it up there, and he's going to probably end up being a free agent this year, and he's going to get his money. So Bogaerts is looking up like, wait, like I've been at least a better hitter than all these guys, and for my entire career, and here I am, I'm basically making pennies next to them. So I think if there's one guy that you probably want to lock up, I think it's probably Devers, because barring some catastrophic injury, I don't think there's a chance that Bogaerts is going to at least, test the free agent market. Now, he's a different guy. He lives in Aruba, obviously. He doesn't really like, he's sort of off the grid type of guy. So you never know with that. I think it was sort of unprecedented for him to even take that extension in 2019. That was before I was 2019. But I think you're looking at a situation where Devers is the guy that you want to lock up first, because I think if you allow Bogaerts to leave, and Bogaerts goes to free agency, keep in mind Bogaerts and Devers are tight, and though it's a business and everybody says it's a business, like Devers is actually probably looking at how they'll treat Xander Bogaerts. And so I think that if you have Devers locked up before that, I think that could probably, sort of temper the emotions of a lot of Red Sox fans, obviously, who are probably going through it right now in terms of them, possibly losing another two cornerstone franchise players.
I don't, I agree with a lot of what you're saying about those two guys, Julian. I will say the one difference I think is Xander really wants to be with the Red Sox, and I think Rafi wants to get what his value is. I see Rafi being a lot more like Mookie than Xander was ever like Mookie. And I wonder if at some point Xander would say to Scott, I want to get a better deal than what I have now, but I don't necessarily need to get Corey Seager's deal or that average annual average. But but maybe there's a deal to be made where I think Rafi's going to want to get what he's worth and not, 10 cents less. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And you do wonder if they can keep both of those guys. They have Marcelo Mayer, they have Nick York, they have other guys coming up. But I know a lot of people in this organization would be crushed if they let Xander go. I think he's a special guy to a lot of people within the organization, and that letting him go would be a lot different, I think, than Mookie leaving, because Xander has been a two-time champion. He's a guy a lot of people in that organization feel a close connection to. So there's going to be a lot of emotions involved in that whole decision too.
Well, I'm curious what the fan tolerance for that would be. I mean, logically, you can look at it and say, well, they have Trevor Story that they can move over. Myers, up and coming in the minor leagues. Xander's going to be on the wrong side of 30 and clearly is going to have to change positions at some point based on his defensive metrics. So there's rationale to let him leave if the price gets too steep. But are fans going to put up with that again? With Mookie, at least the Red Sox would make the argument, whether it was valid or not, that Mookie wanted maximum money and kind of convinced the fan base that that's why he left. But with Xander, he's already signed a extension for $20 million a year that you like the guys that Julian mentioned. I mean, Lindor, Correa, Seager, all these guys who are equal or probably lesser players to him are making much more money now. I think fans would understand if Xander wanted to match that. And, he's such a popular guy. He's done everything right for the most part since he's been here. And I think the fan base, while recognizing how well Bloom has built this team, especially last year, and how they're always going to find some incremental advantage or try to, they also want stars and they want guys they can relate to, and someone who, if they spend $199 on a jersey or whatever that costs, isn't going to be playing for the New York Mets the next season. I guess is probably a question for Alex or Pete, but is there would sentimentality or what the fans desire be any factor whatsoever in what the Red Sox ultimately do with Xander and what they offer him?
My sense is no. I think that I do not think that there are people that they want to keep, but I don't think that they operate in a world in which they need to keep anyone. And I think that they would. I do think that they did talk in spring training with both Xander and with Devers, but there wasn't enough there to convince either player that there was going to be, at least when I talked to both of them a couple of days ago, in the last couple of days, that neither player thought that there was going to be that there was the makings of an agreement before the start of the season. They don't want to stop. They don't want to talk in season. There's a high level answer to this, which is they can afford to keep both. You think about the money that they have coming off of the books. JD Martinez, free agent after this year. David Price's dead money, gone. Nate Eovaldi, free agent after this year. So there are financial resources that are coming off the books. The only major long-term contract that they now have is Story. And they can, and that's not a giant colossal, well, Sale too, I guess. That also warrants notice, but Sale only has, after this year, a couple of years left on his deal. They can afford both of them. Particularly if they're able to find grounds for a discount. But I just think that I feel like they are not going to lock themselves into a series of 9-figure deals with a number of spots. I don't think that that's something that they're looking to do. My guess My guess is that they'll find common ground with one of them. That's just a guess.
On the topic of Story, and maybe this is, I guess one of the things that I've been wondering this whole spring is that move to second. Is that like sincere? You know, I'm not saying that he's not talented enough to handle it, but I'm just so curious, like, what's the motivation to go into a place where you have to move? And I guess my question is that insurance for the Red Sox in case Bogaerts does leave? What do you guys think about Story? And I do want to talk a little bit about the defensive adjustments there, and if there are any concerns with him playing at second instead. But let's start there in acquiring him. What do you guys think? Is that just in case anything bad happens with Bogaerts? Is that why they brought him in?
Well, I don't think it was just because of that. They needed something for their offense. He was the best available guy. The contract is a very good contract, but it wasn't a $300 million contract. So I think, they wanted the offensive upgrade anyway, but it certainly doesn't hurt that as Xander Bogaerts leaves, you have a, accomplished major league shortstop that you can move over there. So that's certainly an added benefit, but I don't think that was the primary reason that they did this, though. No.
Yeah, I would say definitely not the primary motivating factor. They love having an infield that has Story, Bogaerts, Devers in it, and Story, not only Red Sox offense at second base last year was brutal. Their defense wasn't much better than that at the position over the course of last year. Story gives them a significant upgrade in both of those facets. He also allows them to do a little bit to cover some of the shortcomings that Bogaerts has at shortstop by virtue of some repositioning. Story will have very good range laterally to his right that allows Bogaerts to move over into the hole, which is where he struggles the most. But it does cover them. I don't think that was. I don't think they were ignorant to that factor. Oh, what do you mean? Really? If Bogaerts leaves, he could play shortstop too. I do not think they're blind to that fact, but I think that they are very happy to be able to. So I think it leaves them in a decent fallback spot should that happen. I don't think that makes it a foregone conclusion, in part because of the money that they do have coming off of the books and what they can afford moving forward. As for his transition, I was talking about that with him yesterday. He's spent a pretty good amount of time standing around on the right side of the infield because of shifts over the last few years of his career. He has not felt like that's been much of an adjustment at all. Like it's all been coming pretty naturally to him. The biggest thing has just been communication and figuring out how to partner with Bogaerts in the middle infield, and where to defer to Bogaerts on certain balls. But he does not seem to think that is a big adjustment.
Looking around the rest of the infield, I'm curious what you guys think that we can see out of Dahlbeck this year, and if he can hold down first. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think he looks a lot better at first base. I think you're looking at even some of the balls he's scooping, he made a scoop the other day where he's, he's stretched out and, sort of, that full thing. And they went through these drills a lot, throughout the spring, and Dahlbeck was really, really into him. You can tell he's really, really sort of bought into the position. Last year, he was sort of learning it on the fly. He was sort of a guy that was like, okay, you're a third baseman, but you're playing first here. Get called up to the big leagues, you're playing first base for us. We need a first baseman. He's like, okay, here's the first baseman glove. So, you put that together with trying to learn how to hit, and not getting beat on fastballs. That's a lot. But I think this year he looks a lot more nimble around the bag. He looks a lot more. He looks leaner too. And I don't know if that might change during the season, obviously. But he looks a lot like the guy that sort of the Red Sox, envision. I mean, he's really bought into first base. So I think you're looking at a person who can be a solid first baseman for them, and because he's actually a really, really good first baseman. I mean, third baseman, he's a really good shortstop. He's an athletic guy. It's funny, I wrote about that early in the spring, how his athleticism sort of gets undercut because he's such a big, powerful guy. But I think you're looking at a person that's made a lot of improvements, and you're seeing a lot different attitude. He's sort of more assertive and sure of himself, particularly walking around the clubhouse. He's sort of, mingling with his teammates more, and just sort of more outgoing. And you see him talking to third base coach Carlos Febles, who also works with the infielders. He seems really, really engaged. So I think you're looking at a person who had his first taste of the big leagues and saying, okay, now it's time for me to make that next jump. I have an idea of how this works, and that leads to confidence.
You know, Julian, I really like that story that you did about the infield defense, and I realized that the Red Sox had the second most errors out of any team last year in the regular season. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned, and do you think that the things that they were doing in spring training are going to make a measurable difference once they start to play?
Yeah, I think that. Well, I mean, we'll see how it goes. If they, I mean, they say they're going to keep it up during the regular season. I know it's probably hard, you know, in the regular season because you have so much other stuff going on. But I do think that you saw buy-in with it. I mean, even Bogarts, like he, you know, Fabula says he has problems going to his right, and you know, and which Alex alluded to with you know, sort of the range issue. So they had him doing backhands to his right the entire time. You know, Bobby had issues with, you know, snap tags, you know, with the, you know, snap throws down to first base from Christian Vasquez. So he was working on those. So I think you're looking at an entirely different team. In conjunction with that, though, I think having somebody that like a Story that's consistent presence at second base, and having not having to sort of platoon that position, I think that makes the middle infielders a little bit more comfortable in terms of where they like the ball, where they like the feeds. You know, it's sort of like the pitcher-catcher connection between a second base and, you know, how a pitcher connects to his catcher, you know, a second baseman connects to his shortstop. So I think that's going to help, you know, the defense significantly in terms of, you know, just their overall communication.
As Alex Cora, well, as Cora always says about Dahlbeck, everybody says he had a bad year and he hit 25 home runs. So, you know, I think you can't give up on that power potential.
I think let's keep going. I can't believe it's already 6:45 because I do want to do more on that, but I also wanted to get to the outfield too. If you guys can't tell how we're doing all of this. So a lot of questions from readers about Jackie Bradley Jr. coming back. I remember when they made that deal, like 4 hours before the lockout started, maybe even fewer than that.
Closer to 4 minutes.
Peter, Alex, it was either one of you guys who wrote about the fact that it was about the prospects they brought back, and we will talk about prospects towards the end of here. So I realized that that Jackie has said that he's going to be a different Jackie at the plate. I'm very interested to see what you guys think about him shifting to right, because correct me if I'm wrong, they're thinking Verdugo on left, Kiki Hernandez at center, and Jackie in right. I'm also curious if there have been any plate adjustments, and if he thinks, I mean, I know every player says, yeah, I'm going to have a bounce back season, you know, I'm better than I've ever been, I'm healthier than I've ever been. But have there been adjustments made by Bradley to improve his hitting, to sort of add the other dimension for the Red Sox? And if not, can they afford to still play him in the field, even if they're going to lose something at the plate? I know that was a lot. So let's start with bringing him back. And do you guys think that that was the right decision? Do you think that he's going to make an impact in right? Is that the right move there?
Certainly an interesting decision, and one that gets into the complexities of they walked away from a guy who hit 30 homers for them last year, at time carried them in Hunter Renfro, in exchange for a guy who had one of the worst offensive seasons of anyone in baseball in years. And but the Red Sox did, you know, you're seeing in both Story and Bradley, the Red Sox were making a concerted effort to upgrade their defense. They were very mindful of the fact that they were bad defensively last year. Overall, they were much worse than they wanted to be. They were giving away outs. It hindered the performance of a lot of their pitchers. So they believe that they're at their best when that their pitching staff is at their best when they have two center field caliber defenders in the outfield, in both center and right, especially at Fenway. So mission accomplished there. And they do think that, you know, they've seen Bradley being pretty good in the not too distant past, as disastrous as last year was. This spring, certainly he was putting a great deal of emphasis on simply tracking the ball and kind of cleaning up some movement so that he was more head on the ball, less movement. So he's seeing the ball. I did think that it was interesting to see him in one of the final games of spring training, foot down with 2 strikes. You know, foot was down and he pulled a 96 mile an hour fastball for a home run. He did not hit at all with 2 strikes last year. It was a foregone conclusion that he'd strike out. He did not hit velocity last year. So even in a spring training setting, like that's at least a glimmer of the fact that there unquestionably, like he has the potential to be better than he was last year. If he is only marginally better than that, though, then the Red Sox are going to be having some interesting conversations about where to go in their outfield, particularly given that they did not add a 4th outfield, like someone with a Renfro profile this offseason who could maybe take over a job.
I mean, I guess he can't do any worse, Alex, right? I mean, he has to be at least a little better. He was the worst hitter in the big leagues last year, basically. And to me, I think being back with the Red Sox will help him. Being back at Fenway will help him. And being back around the hitting coaches will help him. I think there's a level of comfort there. I mean, Jackie's never going to be a particularly good average hitter, but he certainly can provide some power. And I'm going to be interested to see how he plays in right field, because I always thought back in 2013, the way Shane Victorino played right field was a huge key to that team. And this was a guy who was a longtime center fielder who proved to be, a Gold Glove right fielder and made a long list of very important plays for them in the outfield that year. I wonder, the part of me thinks, like, how can you not play Jackie Bradley Jr. in center field? But,
Right.
He is going to be, I think it's going to be interesting to see him in right field, because he can be a game changer there that allows Kike to play a couple steps maybe over to left. So, their defense in the outfield could be really, outstanding. But of course, as Alex was saying, Jackie's got to hit to be out there. They're not just going to put him out there because of his glove, as good as it is.
I just looked up what Alex mentioned there. Against 2 strikes, he hit 102 with a 338 OPS last year with 2 strikes. I mean, that is just abysmal. I'm surprised that they're doing this. I thought when they made the trade, Alex and these guys wrote about sort of the reason for it, more so acquiring the prospects, and Jackie was just sort of an afterthought, was kind of the way I thought about it. And I figured they would go out and find some other undervalued, overlooked guy whose numbers seem to fit at Fenway Park, like Renfro, and waited through spring training, and it just doesn't happen. So I guess we're doing this. I guess it's going to be Jackie, at least for a while.
But they've been big on buy low with outfielders, right? Like, you think back to Victorino, he was a buy low. He was coming off of a terrible season back then. Renfro, like a year ago. So the funny thing about Renfro, for all of the, like, how can you get rid of that guy? He was coming off when they signed him, a 2020 season when he hit $160, and the Rays decided they were going to release him rather than risk paying him $3 million. So I think that the Red Sox are open-minded. They like to create the way that you can do the most benefit to your organization is either by acquiring prospects who are really transformatively awesome, or by giving opportunities to guys who underperformed elsewhere and having them flourish with your team. Like the Dodgers model is fueled as much by Walker Buehler and by Bellinger and by Seager as it is by Max Muncy and Justin Turner and other guys Chris Taylor, guys who come from other organizations and really outperform what they've done elsewhere. So you kind of have to be willing to take some of those chances, but then to move on from guys. The problem with that is that exactly what we're talking about. Like, they haven't created much of a fallback option for themselves with Bradley in right field.
And I thought there was a pretty good chance that they would trade, Bradley during spring training and get somebody else. I wasn't convinced he was going to break camp with them when they originally made that deal. So yeah, I find it interesting that they haven't gone out and found another outfield option. Maybe they will.
The defensive side of things, though, do not underestimate how much Chaim Bloom believes that is foundational to building winning teams. Like, great defense. The Rays went from terrible in 2007 to becoming a World Series contender in 2008 because they managed to have one of the great defensive overhauls of any team in recent memory. To a lesser degree, the Red Sox of 2012 to 2013 accomplished that, and Bloom is very, very mindful of that. So I do think that Bradley was not merely an afterthought. Like, he was, there were characteristics of, they wanted another center fielder to pair with Kike, and they got it. It's just a question of whether or not his bat will let him stay out there.
And where do the Rays always like to have good defense in the outfield? You know, that they spend a lot more time, I think, thinking about outfield defense than a lot of teams do. And that's been, you know, that's why Kiermaier has been around as long as he's been.
Julian, were you going to say something?
No, to that point about Kiermaier, that's what I was going to bring up. I think, you know, Bloom's I guess a Tampa guy. You know, Kiermaier is like, he was huge for them. And I think he probably sees a little bit of, you know, Jackie in Kiermaier in a sense. I think Kiermaier's a little bit of a better hitter. But in terms of defensively, I mean, they're neck and neck, right? So, you know, you look at the Red Sox, you know, I think though Hunter Renfro had a really good season and he was a Gold Glove finalist, that was probably a little bit inflated a little bit by the sort of the highlight plays he made. He did, you know, overrun a lot of balls. He did airmail a couple balls. I think me and Pete talked about it all the time where, you know, it would be the cutoff man to home plate and, you know, it would be the run on first base and he would, you know, airmail a ball to home plate. And he didn't have to do that because that guy was going to be safe at home plate. Then that guy advances to second and then they hit a single, the guy scores. So Jackie understands really how to do things defensively. He understands how to like bounce the ball when he has to, you know, sort of keep the ball low so that other runner doesn't advance. He thinks on a different level defensively. And I think that can really help in conjunction with, you know, having Kike in center. It allows Kike to probably just play a little bit more, you know, straight up versus having to go gap to gap all the time. He might probably just worry about the left center gap at Fenway versus the right center gap. So I think there's a lot of value in having Jackie there because, you know, it allows the outfield defense to just to play straight up and Jackie be like, don't worry about this. You know, I sort of have everything, you know, to the left of me, to the right of me. You just play over here and worry about, you know, Alex Verdugo and left field who can sometimes run up against the wall and, you know, cause chaos.
I want to leave time to do predictions. So let's move on to prospects very quickly, although I do think we could talk for like 2 hours about the prospects too. There are some questions in here. Do you think that there are any players starting in the minor leagues at the start of the season who could have an impact at the major league level? Also, a lot of questions about Tristan Casas and when we're going to see him and if the hype is real there. So let's start with the first one. If you guys could pick one player you think that we're going to see, who might it be?
Well, you're always in pretty good shape to bet on pitchers. I think that, you know, they'll hope that Darwinson Hernandez reasserts himself. I also think for all that we talk about Casas, it's going to be really interesting to see, especially if Bradley struggles. Their outfield depth right now is Jarren Duran, right? So this is going to be a big. It's going to be pretty critical for him to reestablish himself, so that he represents viable everyday depth. If Verdugo gets injured, if Bradley gets injured, or if Bradley struggles.
Yeah, I think with Casas, it's going to be, you know, Chaim has said many times he believes a player needs to succeed for a long term at AAA. He doesn't look at AAA as, you know, you'll be there for a little while before we call you up. He wants to see a guy really succeed in AAA. So I think there's going to be a lot of, oh, Casas just went, 10 for 15 with 3 home runs, call him up. I don't think they're going to look at it like that. I think they're going to want him to get a good stretch at Worcester and see pitchers another time and go through a slump and come out of that slump. I don't think this is going to be one of those things where he heats up and, in May, they're going to call him up. I think they're going to want to see him be there for a little bit.
Julian, are there any prospects that you thought you were impressed by during spring training?
I think it was in Jarren Duran. As much, I think that last year was sort of this inflated year. I wouldn't, where his, you got to be careful looking at Worcester stats like this, that park, the ball carries and everything like that. I wasn't necessarily impressed with him in the outfield. And I think that's probably what's holding him back is the fact that he just really hasn't, in my opinion, improved in that realm of his game. And I'm not sure, if he could be, possibly a long-term fit. I don't want to say he's a long-term fit in center, but right now, as it currently stands, he doesn't look like a center fielder. It just doesn't look natural. And then again, he came up as an infielder. So it's different. But at the plate, he was impressive. I think he was last year. I think he got in his head about hitting home runs because he saw the fact that he can drive the ball, and he's never a guy that could really drive the ball, historically growing up, even through college. And then he got, I think Alex wrote a story, but he got bigger. His dad put him on this weightlifting program, and all of a sudden he just started, hitting tape measure shots. And at Worcester, the ball was traveling. So he came up, and it's like, yeah, the game isn't like that now. Like it speeds up a little bit. So now you see him take more of like a two-strike approach, utilize his speed a little bit more, make contact, hit the ball the other way. So, I mean, I think I would say Casas would be the guy that I would think would come up. But then again, I think that all depends on Dahlbeck and how he does it. Last year, everybody was saying bring up Casas, or Casas is right around the corner. Dahlbeck is just trade him now when you wait for Casas. But there's really no guarantee, I think, in the big leagues that a guy in the minor leagues is sort of can excel in the big leagues, as evident by Dahlbeck early on, as evident by Duran early on, as evident by even Jackie Bradley Jr. early on. So I do think that their system is definitely building depth, but I think in terms of the players that can make an impact right now, I think it's the players that you sort of see on the field with them currently, with the exception of probably Darwin's and Hernandez.
All right, we're going to wrap this up really quickly. I just sent in the chat for viewers. You guys can see our predictions that went up on the website the other day. So none of you guys picked the Red Sox to win the World Series. Tell me, how many games do you think the Red Sox will win? Let's go around the horn and start with Chad.
Well, I saw like the over-unders tend to be about 85.5 to 87.5, somewhere around there. I think they're a little better than that. I think they're going to be consistently underestimated because of the way Bloom builds the team around the fringes and brings in guys that you may not know or may not have had a lot of success yet, but will tend to fit in, find a way to thrive here. They'll find something they like in guys that you don't see it coming. So I would say probably I'll put them at 91. I think they're going to be good again. I picked them to be the third wild card team to get into the playoffs, and I don't know if it qualifies as a surprise because last year was a surprise, and maybe it shouldn't catch us off guard again if they are a really good team. But I think they'll be better than what people are expecting.
Alex, what about you?
I have no idea. I hate predicting.
That's fair. No, that's totally fair. I
You
won't
do.
make you do it.
I think gun to my head, I had them at 85 last year. I think that they've upgraded slightly, so I'll call it 86. Please, no guns, no violence.
Pete, what's your pick?
I think the American League East is going to be brutal. There's 4 really good teams. They're going to play each other 18 or 19 times. I think they're all going to, I don't think anybody's going to be, like a 100-win team. I think the Sox will probably win 89 or 90 games, and that will represent a pretty good season in that league and could well be a wild card team. I think it's going to be the competition is going to be so hot in that division. It's hard to say, hey, this is a 95-win team, no matter how good you are. So I think 90, 91, something like that, that's where they're going to end up.
All right, Julian.
I'd probably go like in between 86 and 90. So probably, I'm terrible at math. I'm assuming that's, I'll just do 88. That's
All right.
because
Okay, that's fair.
I think they need some upgrades. I think in terms of like, there are just a lot of uncertainties in terms of like their rotation. And there's a lot of waiting, like, oh, we'll wait on James Paxton. No, we'll wait on Chris Sale. Well, that happened last year. And then, Chris Sale ends up throwing against, teams that are sort of, not really, really good teams. And then sort of, gets his number handed to him in the playoffs. So, they're definitely going to need to upgrade, I think, in both departments to be successful. They're going to hit there. That's what they do. That's their MO for, every year. I think if you're a Red Sox hitting coach, I think that right now, I think that's the safest job you can have in terms of the entire staff. They're going to hit.
Well, tell that to Tim Hires.
Fair.
All right, so we went over a little bit, but I appreciate everyone bearing with us. This is a great time. Like I said at the start, this could have lasted 2 hours, but we got to go do other stuff too. So anyway, I want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight. You can stick with us at globe.com/Red Sox. And while I'm here, I'm going to plug our daily newsletter. If you go to globe.com/108 stitches, you can sign up, and then you will get all of the stuff that we do every single day in your inbox. And it's from all these guys and everyone else. So thank you so much for joining us. And then we will probably see you on Friday. Alex and I are doing live updates for the opener. So tune in and come to globe.com/sports for more. But thank you so much, everyone. And thanks, guys. I appreciate making time.
Thank you
Happy
for everybody who
almost
read.
Thanksgiving.
All right, bye.